aoichainteoir a bheits mé a caint couple of focail a scéalge. So for those people who have not yet joined their local Irish class and gathered a couple of focail, you're all very welcome. And you may be aware, I was at a festival in Gníomhaí celebrating the life of the great Ronan McAwee of T.G. Cearta and the work that he had done in inspiring young people to take pride in their language and get on with it, and to remember that it is an anti-colonial act and that there's no point in speaking Irish if you talk right-wing rubbish in your first language. So very much the inspiration of Ronan and the core value of Gordon Móna and Dram Jarrig is to recognise that the language is the soul of the people. It's part of our anti-colonial programme, and so my contribution in memory of Ronan is, as an Irish speaker myself, not to forget to speak a bit of Irish at every meeting that I go to, so I'm trying to keep that up. That doesn't say that anybody who wants to speak in Irish will get away with comments instead of questions, as far as I gather. I'm delighted tonight to have the joy and the honour of having time to sit and talk for about 45 minutes with Clare, because we never get a minute to sit down and do that. And I would like to include you, in that conversation. So I may, when we're in a subject, ask if somebody in the audience does have a question about that particular thing. So I'm just giving you due warning if you say, oh, I wanted to ask you something else, and say, no, we're not talking about that now. And you'll have to sit down again till it's a Q&A. So if that works, that'll work. And when we come to the Q&A, if we can kind of show of hands of who might have questions, then everybody can see that and take a bit of personal responsibility for making time for as many as possible, if that's all right. So we'll get going.
As you can see, this is totally unscripted, uncoordinated.
We're going to get
This is live and unleashed now with no rehearsals or anything. I've no idea what she's going to ask me. So I'm actually terrified at this stage.
No, don't worry about it. Neither of us actually know what we're going to talk about. Yeah. We just said we'll sit down, we'll see where it takes us. But it occurred to me, Clare, that because you are such a, and I don't say that, in idle flattery, but because of your work in the European Union, you are not just a national, but an international icon for speaking out and speaking out fearlessly and using that platform. But I think particularly here in the North, because of partition and everything else, people here might not know Clare Daly from the start. Who is Clare Daly? What made you get started? Where did you start? And what were you at before you were discovered in the European Union? Is basically the question.
How long have you got? Look, I suppose, first of all, there's something really odd about Bernadette asking me questions. It's like being interviewed by Caesar, and there's something kind of terrifying about it. It seems to be kind of the wrong way around, to be honest. But look, we've been asked to be here and do as requested. So look, I suppose, like a lot of young people, I came to my political ideas when I was a student. I grew up in the 80s, dark days, not dissimilar to the present in some ways. An era of cutbacks and emigration when most young people, their future was outside this country. So we see history repeating itself but staying the same. So it was out of that. It was quite a political time in the 80s with the Birmingham Six, the anti-apartheid struggle, Thatcher, Reagan, miners' strikes, all of that sort of stuff, and the music and the culture around it. And I suppose I just got involved in left-wing politics then. I was the president of the Students' Union in one of the Dublin colleges. And then, I suppose, use that to organise people, fight the system, and then took that afterwards into my job in the airport as a union organiser, in the community as a campaigner against water charges, and I suppose, activism all the time. Anytime you got a platform, what's the point in having it if you're not using it to change things? And I suppose that's the way I viewed it. It wasn't an end in itself, it was a means to change something and be a platform to organise from. And I suppose I took that then into the European Parliament then afterwards.
Yeah, but you were also, it interests me because I, as you know, was in the belly of the beast and the mother of Parliament, but I never intended, and I don't think I've ever fought an election with the intention of being elected, but it just once or twice actually. It happened. It happened, and you also stood for election in council and in the Dáil before Europe, and as part of that same activism, and were very active around those campaigns.
Well, can I say first that I did stand to win in the elections when I stood in. I can guarantee you that, even though it didn't happen to be in recent times. But I think you're totally right. I mean, there have been people over the years who've kind of approached me and said, I'd like to be a politician. Yeah. And then I'd say, well, actually, then you are the worst person to consider that. Nobody should want to be a politician. For me, it's a kind of a bad word. We sometimes say we just happen to get elected. Because if you just want to get elected to be in that position, then you're definitely the wrong person. So I never set out to be a career politician. It was not something that interested me. I suppose the way in which I ended up in getting elected to a local authority and a council was out of the mass movement against water charges in the 1980s, and that took place at a time of massive inequality in the south. You had, in where I worked at the time, Aer Lingus, the Aer Lingus workers on their own paid more taxes than all the farmers in the country, yet the farmers were getting big handouts from the EU. There were big monies going to the likes of Larry Goodman, big tax concessions, a lot of money not coming into the hands of ordinary people. And then they landed a water tax on people. And people were a bit lost because the union movement at the time wasn't really struggling to defend ordinary people's living conditions and that. And what we did was just, I suppose, tap into that and developed a mass movement of civil disobedience and working class solidarity, which empowered people to stand for themselves. So when they kind of came and said, if you don't pay your charge, we're going to bring you to court. And the person was going, oh my God, I'm absolutely mortified. What are the neighbours going to think? I'm up in court. But that was actually turned into a badge of honour, that you were the person on your road who was going to court, but you were the one who was standing for everybody else on that road, and everybody stood behind you. So when they summoned one person, we all went in together and dragged out the legal process, making the point, well, you'll never take all of us. We have the power of numbers. And we did the same in terms of water disconnections, linking up with people. If they threatened to cut people's water off, we reconnected them, went out at night if they saw, all that kind of good stuff. And it was through that we sort of, one of the tactics was, well, the people making these decisions are in the councils, and let's take them on electorally just to punish them and terrify the life out of them so that they reverse the water charges. But it did pose the question then of standing yourself. And when we did that, I did get elected. So then obviously you've got to do the job that people entrust you to do. But as you were kind of saying, I never somebody said, like, vote for me and I'll do this for you. No point in anybody voting for me for that, but vote for me and I will campaign with you and use that platform to articulate your struggle in the chamber and the platform I've been given, because it's easier, I suppose, for me to be heard because I have that honour than those campaigns. So to use it for that and to encourage people to organise for themselves, because it's a myth that politicians change things. They don't. Actually, change comes in spite of politicians. It only comes by ordinary people organising, and it's the politicians eventually catch up with that. We might deal with that in terms of what's going on in the south at the moment with the Occupied Territories Bill, and that it's people's pressure forcing them to act. So that's a lesson that I took on everything, and that's all it is. It's a platform to organise from.
And I think serving that sort of apprenticeship to your own values in challenging circumstances. That's the way I look at it. If you take your ethics into the council chamber, into the Dáil chamber, that's where they get tested. And I'd have seen that myself, where it works. It works in this kind of mantra that many good people, activists, stand for election, and they get elected, and then they think that in order to be able to do good, they have to stay elected. And then in order to stay elected, they have to not offend too many people. So they start, they start dripping away at the things they believe in, and start honing them down to maximise the number of people that will vote for them. So you get to don't mention that because you'll only lose votes. And so at the end of the day, the whole mantra becomes that you have to do what it takes to stay elected. And then you're no good to anybody, you're a career politician. So to have survived that environment locally and nationally, did that give you a head start on being able to do the enormous work that Mick and yourself did in creating a platform in Europe, when almost, I know there were others, from other countries, but it was when you looked at the size of that parliament, Clare, it was a very big body and very, very few dissidents, as it were, to create a platform out of, and yet you created, as you say, an international platform.
Yeah, it's weird. You're totally right. Too many people, when they get elected, they forget why they stood for election in the first place. They presumably got involved because they wanted to change things, but then once they get in, they just want to stay there. And they walk down the middle of the road and, of course, are in danger of getting knocked down by both sides. But Europe, when we went, we had been in the Dáil as quite successful, as in well-known troublemakers in the Dáil. We'd been at the head of a lot of issues around NAMA corruption, around issues of Garda accountability and corruption, championing the causes of Garda whistleblowers, which actually led to 2 ministers for justice and 2 Garda commissioners having to resign, and a whole talk in society about the role of the state and the role of the police. And looking back at the end of that campaign, everybody wanted it. Everybody loved the Garda whistleblowers and everybody was for reform. But when we took on that case first, everybody wasn't for it. Like, the guards were coming out and saying, you better be very careful what you're saying here, what you're alleging here. Guards are putting their lives on the line every day for the security of the state and all this. Mick used to point out that more people died in construction than actually guards who've been killed. But nonetheless, we still kind of had to take that on. I was arrested for drink driving, even though I wasn't drunk driving or drinking at all, because of us questioning that kind of thing. So I suppose our experience did give us that issue. But when we went to Europe, the reason we went was because we were looking at a load of stuff coming and having an impact on the lives of people in Ireland, and nobody was talking about it, and nobody knew a clue about what was going on or anything like that. And we said, right, let's go and see, can we change this? And if we can't, shall we burn the place down? And actually, we had bought quite a large supply of matches about two years in, like that was going to be the way. And bizarrely then, the war in Ukraine happened. And we felt we were in the right place at the right time. Now, that might sound mad, because you may or may not know we are well-known Kremlin agents and Russian ideologues and champions for Putin puppets and all this kind of stuff. But it was utterly mental that here you had war returning to Europe, and we had the audacity to make the point that war is not ended by more war, but by peace. And that there should be, and the European Union should get behind delivering peace, as is our obligation under the United Nations Charter to resolve conflict by peaceful means. Never saw anyone in the European Union wanting to arm Yemenis or arm Palestinians or arm anybody else in defence, but the checkbooks were open and the public of Europe's money was being pumped in, and has been pumped in since, to arm Ukraine and arm the people in Ukraine. And contrary to that helping, the poor people of Ukraine. It actually only succeeded in the war going on and more Ukrainians being killed. Now, that doesn't mean that Russia aren't responsible. Of course they are. And we absolutely condemned Russia for invading Ukraine. It's against international law. They shouldn't have done it. It was unjustified, but it certainly wasn't unprovoked. It was provoked by NATO expansion, and we are where we are. So that was unbelievable. The vitriol that landed on us when that happened. I mean, I'm an anti-war activist. I only said what the Pope said, what Michael D. Higgins says. We just argued for peace. And even if somebody didn't agree with you, like, we weren't arguing for the war to go on or for anything. We just said, sit down and, end this, talk about it, let's resolve this diplomacy. But we might as well have said, go and set fire to Ukraine. Logic was stood on its head. It was so weird. And, there were stickers put on our offices. I'd been in public office for a very long time, and I never got the septic emails and vitriol, and the media campaign was relentless. My own feeling is that a section of the establishment in Ireland who were always embarrassed by the Irish people returning people who were Euro-critical felt that this was their chance. They were embarrassed when Ireland voted against Lisbon, against Nice, that we always sent people in, always questioned that narrative. And now they felt with the war they had a chance to eliminate us out of that. And I think that's what it was. Because we've made the point, these are the same people, they're embarrassed to be Irish. I mean, yeah, we're European. I'm happy to say I'm European. I'm an internationalist, so I want to cooperate with everybody. But I'm Irish European. That makes me different than a Polish European or a Spanish European. And we're all more better off when we share our cultures. And actually, people all over Europe love the fact that Ireland is neutral, that Ireland is different. We're the only colonised country at the heart of Western Europe, so we have an affinity with the global south, and we can be that sort of powerful voice in the centre of Europe, very well connected with US empire, but with an affinity to the global south. What a stage to have. What a history to be able to bring to the world, and they blow it. The likes of Micheál Martin, who just want to bend the knee to the European establishment because, oh my God, if we're different than anybody else, what an embarrassment, what a disgrace. That's the way they are. They're embarrassed to be Irish. They're the same people who have betrayed this country throughout its history and so on. So, I mean, the space for that is huge. Like, everywhere we go, and you were saying, how was it hard and how could you steel yourself for that? Because I suppose you recognise that the division in society is between ordinary people and those in power. And we were getting sort of absolutely demonised in the media, like the two freaks in the corner with nobody talking to them, over in the bowl corner, everyone going on, oh my God, they're desperate. But the reality was completely different. Like, we'd be speaking in the Parliament, and every single day people would come up from the translation booths, or a security guard. I'm a Latvian translator. I love when you guys speak. You're speaking for me. We never hear it for anybody else. We had the advantage of going to nearly every continent. Every place we went, we met people who knew us and the work that we've been doing for arguing for peace and demilitarisation in terms of Ukraine. What is the point in society now, at a time of record wealth for humanity, of a global challenge of climate change, and we're spending our resources on more defence? Because the European Union's solution now is to spend an extra 800 billion euros on defence every year going forward, which is utter lunacy. Think of all the things they could be spending on that. So we got our confidence by knowing that we were speaking the truth. Okay, it wasn't nice, some of the abuse from what we call the rugby dads in Dublin 4, who seemed, and they were always middle-aged men in the audience, but they were generally affluent, middle-class, middle-aged men who really took an affront that we would speak out and stand up. I'd never experienced that before, and the sexualised nature of some of the emails from these people was mad. I'd never experienced
Absolutely.
it.
I noticed that
I know.
when the canvas, that I found it fascinating. And part of the reason I found it fascinating is that same kind of half affluent, verging on arrogant, it doesn't have an exclusive pullover, but one that the rest, most people wouldn't be wearing. was quite ambiguous about me, you know, because they were young when I was a bit older than them. So they would I would be in the street and they'd say, oh, it's Bernadette. What are you doing? I'd say, campaigning for Clare. And then they would tell me, as if, you know, I didn't know how bad this woman was. And I'd kind of be offended that they'd forgotten when I was young. They probably thought the same about me. But it was a measure of how much they felt threatened. They almost felt personally threatened by things that didn't threaten them at all. And it was, to my mind, the power of the relentless message coming in from the media. And so behind all of that, when you ask the question, like, why would they go to that much trouble? It pinpointed the importance, it pinpointed for me the importance of the politics that are happening in this country at this time. Because just as you look at, and you say, which I totally agree with, I oppose the invasion of Ukraine, the same as and opposed the Russian invasion of Afghanistan, and most of the left got it wrong because they didn't understand colonialism. But they were provoked. NATO was in breach of international regulations, beginning to surround Russia by pulling countries into NATO. And there's a clear determination within the United States, and a clear determination, to my mind, within elements of Southern society, because the United Kingdom's already in NATO, within Southern society, within a certain, well, what I would call a nest of vipers, because I'm a moderate person. There's a nest of vipers in the Free State, in the army, and that's worrying when you know they're in the army, they're in the university, they're in the media, and again, they may not be a large number, but they're people in positions of power. They're in the Parliament, they're in the Senate, and they are quite determined by fair means or foul, by secrecy and denial, to actually make a case and to argue and to create a drive and a need for Ireland to feel our place is within NATO. And that, to my mind, is quite crucial now. If we look at the two ends, there's Ukraine up here, and then we have the Middle East. And to my mind, when people say, I heard someone in the media say, Joe Biden has been humiliated, but been humiliated by Israel, as they would say in Derry, your granny's daughter. Damn the humiliation. He is controlling Israel. He is in the driving seat. Israel is America's and Europe's colonial project. And yet we are sitting again quietly, while people complain that somebody like yourself or Mick is a Putinista, or correctly a Putinisto in Mick's case. You'd think the people of Ireland would know we're all supposed to be Reds that won't get under the bed, and there's no Reds in the government in Russia. That the Soviet Union was defeated by America and broken up. So the communist Moscow conspiracy would be laughable if it weren't for the fact that we have a body of people in government and in positions of influence who are flirting with fascism and who are determined to end Ireland's neutrality and take us into a military American alliance. And I know you've spoken about that before, but I'm not sure because we're stuck up here. We're on the UK side of it. And I'm not sure if our audience here is as maybe aware of how that's been done, so that if we ever get a border poll, we may be absorbed into a country that has already been brought back into the empire. And the empire will be a military empire led by the US. So, having said, to people don't be making comments, ask questions. I did that myself. But
you're allowed though, you're controlled.
My core question is it, can you spell that out a bit for people so that those who aren't familiar with it can see what's happening?
Yeah, and it's not a nice story. This process of eliminating Ireland's neutrality is on steroids now at this stage. I would see it very much in the context, in part, of European integration as well. We have to see that the Nice and Lisbon treaties were bringing us more into a European Union whereby powers that were normally done by sovereign states, by your own government, who are more accountable to you because you can at least get out on the streets, and were being subsumed by this European Commission, who are very much like a US model now, where they are literally captured by lobbyists. There are 60,000 lobbyists in Brussels alone, and they are the ones who have the ear of the Commission, big military, big tech, big pharma. They're the ones who decide policy and where things are going. And out of these treaties, they subsumed us more into this one European Union with a foreign policy, common foreign policy, which all the time should have been left to the individual member states themselves. And sadly, there is a huge section of society in Ireland who cannot wait to get into that. They are literally selling this country down the tube. We are nearly there already in terms of the amount of issues that we're integrated with already. We operate in PESCO, in common military projects. We have taken part recently in common NATO exercises for training purposes. We're in common battle groups with Europeans. And next year, there's going to be what they call, now they'll tell you that this is scaremongering, that there's no EU army, but next year there is going to be a defence union. Next year there is going to be what they call a rapid deployment capacity force, which is initially 5,000 standing army under an EU command, which can be deployed into anywhere, including what they call is non-cooperative environments that don't want you, and does mean boots on the ground. So the prospect of Irish men and women in the defence forces being sent into Africa to protect not European values, because we all know there are none of them when we see what they do in terms of back in Israel. Well, there are, but they're the old values of colonialism. And we would be part of an EU army going into Africa to defend the interests of German or Italian energy companies. Because when they tell you they're in Africa because we don't have interests, we have values, everyone else is there for their interests, but we're there for our values. That's clearly not true. They're there to advance their economic interests in the same as they did in the olden days. And that's why I think it's so important that, but devastating what's obviously going on in Gaza and now Lebanon, but the mask has dropped now. And everyone can see European values for the nonsense that they are, the old values of colonialism, so they've seen through that. But in terms of Ireland, they've gone very much down the road. I mean, even things like the triple lock, which obviously ties into the UNIFIL people. Now, in Lebanon, so at the moment when Irish troops go abroad, we've a unique, proud history of peacekeeping. We can only go when the government, when the Dáil, and when the UN mandate is there. That's the only basis in which Irish troops go abroad. And that has meant that the Irish passport is kind of loved, or it has been, up until recently. The history of our peacekeepers was really well respected, and everybody has a really high standing of the army. They want to remove that. They say, it doesn't work. And because the Russians could put a veto on, they could stop us being sent somewhere where we wanted to do peace, even though that's never happened before, and even though it's the US who put the veto on in relation to any action in relation to Gaza, but they don't say anything about that, of course. So the reality is the only reason. We can send people on humanitarian missions, on training missions. So why would we be sending troops abroad? The only missions we'd be going on then are ones that don't have a UN mandate. And why would any Irish person want to go to another country on a mission that is basically a colonial interventionist mission and that's the mandate? It's completely abhorrent to our history, but there's no discussion in the media. And to be honest, most of the political parties have just paid lip service to it. A lot of them, some of them will say, oh yeah, no, we're in favour of neutrality and that, but there actually hasn't been any serious engagement around the undermining of the triple lock. They'll tell you, oh, Ireland's under threat, the Russians are coming. I mean, for God's sake, like, for the Russians to actually get to Ireland, they would chop over everybody else, like, you know, in Europe. At that stage, World War III, we'd be gone anyway, so it's not actually anything to worry about, really. But you need an enemy. If you want to persuade people that economic resources, which could be spent on housing, fighting climate change, health and all the rest, should be wasted on lining the pockets of the military-industrial complex, then you have to have an enemy. And the enemy in Ireland is Russia and Putin and all the rest of it. It's just utterly mental. It really is. And when you see what's going on now in the Middle East, and it does tie into our UNIFIL troops there now on the front line, how much worse if we had been part of NATO or that. But we already effectively are in everything but name. But that name bit is still very important. It really is, you know, because they're tied to increase in military expenditure up to 2% of GDP. That means an extra billion probably on defence, and it's not going to poor soldiers. It's going on military hardware. They want to protect the cables. These cables, oh my God. And Micheál Martin says 98% of information worldwide goes through the cables. Yeah, it does, but not the Irish ones. That's worldwide. We're not responsible for the whole world's communication. And actually, in those cables, there's only 6 cables going across between Ireland and the US, and they're all laid out in different ways, that if the Russians were going to cut them all, they couldn't really do it together unless we were in the middle of a war. And actually, there's been no evidence of any cable ever having been deliberately cut by anybody. That's not me saying that. That's the European Union saying that, ever. But they do get cut all the time by fishing vessels, by weather, and nobody notices because there's a huge capacity there. So why would we do NATO exercises and protect our cables when actually there's nothing causing them any damage? It's an excuse to spend money on sort of this hardware and submarines and all this other rubbish that they want to earn money for the military. But it's mad.
Well, it's a bit like saying you'd need to take over a clothing factory. Yes, the hem of your trousers got caught in your head.
Exactly.
I know, and it's as simple as that. So, that question fascinates me, but we've come through a number of topics, and I'm going to just ask before we maybe close off our discussion and come to question and answer specifically. If there are people in the room who have had a particular interest in some of the topics we've raised, is there a question burning in somebody's mind on that they want to maybe raise or say, I didn't understand that bit, or what about that, or have you thought about the other? I'm going to take a quick look, and do not be shy. Yeah, good, don't be shy. I see a hand here, because if you're going to be shy, you're going to miss the boat. So there's a person over here, yeah. Oh, can you wait just till we get the mic to you, and then everybody will hear it. I'm a bit sorry for the people over here, because you're far away.
Just a quick question. I obviously read English, and don't know what the Irish triple lock is. Would you mind explaining that to me?
Okay. It is the basis upon which Irish troops are sent abroad. It requires the backing. It has to be under a UN mandate. If it isn't a UN mandate, they can't go. That's for more than 12. And then it has to have the backing of the Parliament, the Dáil, and of the government. So the government, the Parliament and the UN have to support a mission before Irish troops can go abroad. Now that's different. Humanitarian missions, training missions are allowed. Numbers below 12 don't require that, but to effectively send troops abroad beyond that, that's what you need. And they're trying to remove that now. They say because it's cumbersome and it doesn't work even though we've an unrivaled record of peacekeeping throughout our history. It's a complete con to try and basically chip away, and that's what we've had, is a chipping away of our neutrality now. We're already quite well subsumed in European militarism, which is going to cost people a hell of a lot in terms of lives, and in terms of money. So.
Yeah, and the importance for that, for example, in terms of most other countries, is that the Prime Minister and the government and the cabinets take decisions, or if you're in Europe, whatever is agreed in Europe, and that's based on our constitutional neutrality, which is now being challenged, even that it is constitutional. Now, anybody else? I'm doing a quick. Yeah, I see a hand up here. How was your time?
I wonder if you actually explain the activity with
Could you?
how it operated.
So you're holding that to your mouth for us to hear. Sorry, could you repeat?
Oh, PESCO. Yeah. Well, that was one of the. So what we've had is really creeping European militarisation going on in a period of time. And if you want to know how it came about because the European Parliament or the European Union commissioned this idea: how do we make Europe safe? And they convened a group of experts, a majority of which came from the military-industrial complex. And surprise, surprise, their answer was, do you know what you'll do now? If you want to be safe in Europe, you'll spend a lot more money on defence. And the very same companies which made that recommendation were the ones who benefited from that. And one of the first projects and ideas was PESCO, which was kind of military cooperation on projects that were maybe under a joint command, or they might do some medical mission here or that kind of thing. Member states didn't have to sign up to it, but Ireland did sign up to it. And there were a number of research programs, and a lot of what they do is that they're saying, and this is what the new Draghi program is that Europe's stalling competitiveness can be solved by investing in militarisation. And I remember raising before, saying, well, I'm from Ireland, and that, like, kind of, what's in it for us? And they said, don't worry, Ireland will get some of this money as well. You can certainly develop your military dual-use goods and all that, which you probably know have been increasing in volume on their way to Israel over the past period. So that's not what we want either. So it was one of these forerunner military cooperation programs. They had 9 projects at first. Ireland, you can buy in or buy out of them, but a lot of public money goes to it. And out of that as well was the idea for the first time of direct money going on defence expenditure from direct EU budgets. So now we have the European Defence Fund for that, with the European Peace Facility, which allows you to buy arms, bizarrely, in a George Orwell twist. And then you've had, like, literally hundreds of billion going to Ukraine to keep the war going, rather than investing in a solution for it to stop. So it's one of the programs, and they have all these little acronyms, so what you call it, the little short words. They've STEP, and they've hEorpa, and they've all the ASAP, but they're all basically a way of flushing public money into the hands of the arms companies, effectively led by the big countries mainly. But as I say, our dual-use goods have been skyrocketing on the way to Israel, even as our government tell us that they're appalled by what's gone on in Gaza. They have allowed that to happen.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And now, if I don't have a third, because I did look and I didn't see it. So, oh yes, somebody. Yes, sorry. I'm so busy looking round in the dark, I can't see the people in the light under my nose. My apologies.
Sentence of the Bhaill Martin and the government could actually get rid of the chocolate effect wouldn't after eating.
They say they can, and they brought it in. I think they can. If they move to do that, we'll obviously look at a legal challenge to it. But yeah, they can. It was brought in by legislation, so it can be changed by legislation. Our neutrality isn't enshrined in our constitution, even though it's really something really strong in the hearts and minds of people. And that was quite striking, even at the height of the war, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, when all of that stuff was coming down and they thought they had their chance now we'll get rid of neutrality. But people still held firm in opinion polls and that, but the numbers have been diminishing. And it's all of this propaganda making people feel unsafe. The Russians are coming. I mean, people just thought the Chinese are even coming. I mean, like seriously, like it's just absolutely laughable. But it's got a hold on people. It's
Well,
quite incredible.
we could be right about the Chinese because, let me tell you, I think it was maybe St. Malachi or maybe some lesser known saint said before the end of the world the Chinese would be watering their horses at Loch Ness. And so I would just like to tell you that we're keeping an eye out for them on the loch. And there's no truth in the rumour that the Chinese have a tunnel to Loch Ness and are punching wells down it in order to make us join NATO.
But I think the Chinese is important, kind of, when you think, because all of the information we get here is very Atlanticist. It's very Western focused from US empire and the old colonial countries of Europe. But most of the world live in an entirely different place and have a completely different outlook. And the likes of the Chinese and the countries that form the non-aligned movement, we could be in the unique position of being an ally with them, but yet an equal member in the heart of the beast. Like, how good is that? Like, when Ireland joined the United Nations, little Ireland was the one which got them all to agree on the first non-nuclear proliferation treaty. Ireland did that when other countries couldn't do it, because we had that bridge. It's such a powerful tool which has protected us historically, but is also a beacon around the world, and they are going to blow it. But like next week, there is the meeting in Kazan in Russia of the BRICS. They represent now 50% of the world's population, about 40% of world production. All of these countries have been, they didn't support Russia's war in Ukraine, but they didn't vote to sanction them because they understood the role of empire. Most of the countries in the world and most of the people have spoken out and screamed out at the genocide that we're seeing. It's the Western Bloc and the old colonial powers that are in the minority. And rather than us being on the side of the oppressed, as our neutrality and our internationalism always has been, we're siding, in effect, with the oppressor with a little bit of nice rhetoric thrown in. Because we are on the side of Palestine. We were the 140th country to recognise them. Imagine that, a year into a genocide. Isn't that great when there's, hardly any of it left? And then it's all rhetoric. But the rhetoric is there because they understand that this is really important to people. And if you see now, they're talking about Francis Black's brilliant Occupied Territories Bill, which was to outlaw any trade in goods with the settlements. They have sat on that for years. When that was brought out, it was a beacon everywhere. I remember people in Palestine, when I went to the European Parliament first, because we'd been in the Dáil when Francis moved it, but there were meetings of parliamentary groups that we were involved in other countries around Europe and beyond who were looking to that as a model and organising around it. And they dragged their heels and now, surprise, surprise, on the eve of an election, the Attorney General actually says now, yeah, we can look at it. We actually can look at it, but it's complicated. So we're going to water it down really into a meaningless form. So what does that tell you? Well, two things. One, the games they play, because the secret information has come out about how they were liaising with the Israelis, telling them that they'd frustrate the bill and drag it out, that was a start, which is absolutely the case. But it does show the huge pressure they're under, that on the eve of an election, where they've given away billions to try and buy it, they still feel they have to do something on this because they know that the people are absolutely livid at what's gone on. And this idea that we're great in Ireland, we go to Europe and we try, but it's complicated. Because it's okay, we're very pro-Palestinian, but the rest of Europe isn't like that. We have to bring them with us. I mean, that is treacherous complicity against the backdrop of a genocide. And it isn't even true, because that's not the divide. You may have governments in Europe which are absolutely pro-Zionist and pro-Israel, but actually the people, even in Germany and all of these countries, the people are firmly on the side of the Palestinians and they're totally opposed to what's going on. We should be leading that, and we're not. It's devastating, it really is. So yeah, Micheál Martin, you don't need a legislative change, but we do need to organise to protect it. Yeah, it's scary how much it's sort of been eroded already. Yeah, for sure. So.
So I'm going to make this the last sort of question before I open up to the audience here. But the reason I think that this conversation is so important to have here is because of our position in the north. You know, because when people talk about colonial projects and I've heard people, you know, outside of Ireland who are speaking about Ireland's place because they understand, you know, having been England's first colony, they understand. That's why we have empathy. And then they go on because they don't understand the situation. And I heard it at last night's meeting, a brilliant meeting, a brilliant event in Dublin, where Mandela's grandson, who didn't get into the country after all because the Brits kept his passport too long, but he was able to speak to the women who, as young working girls in gun stores, actually just by doing what they thought was right, inspired and created a boycott movement right across the world. But one of the speakers who were contributing from the floor said, you know, and Ireland is now an independent and sovereign state. And then the poor man thought might be that he had made some kind of mistake, but it wasn't the place. Like a faithful man, he just said it. So there is a great, you know, we're in a particular place here where this place is done. You know, the north is finished. That's my view anyway. You know, it's a matter. It's terminally ill, and the palliative care isn't working. And we have a border poll coming up. And I think that behind the scenes, you know, people look at it in terms of, you know, and what will the loyalists in Belfast do then, which I don't think is actually the big problem. Our big problem is that the people who least want a border poll, the reunification, and the building of a new constitution, a new Ireland, are the people in the south of Ireland who are part of this belief. And they see a united Ireland come on, and that's why the pace has quickened up, so that they have battened down the kind of Ireland we will already have been bought into, and very difficult then to undo because it would be complicated. So that a bit like the unfortunate Ukrainians, by the time they get the Russians pushed back, their president will have sold the entire country, its land, its minerals, everything, for the money to fight the war. And that we are going to be a position of the sham fight at Scarva. That, you know, we think we're going to be doing something, but they will already have pinned down for us the limitations of Ireland, which has the potential to play that international role as a small, neutral, peace-loving country that has never tried to colonise anybody. I'm not going to say the same for the church. The country and the Catholic Church are not the same thing. So that's why I think it's so crucial that people up here know that the border poll isn't what's going to sort it out, because we have to look at what is happening in the south and know what we don't want to join and what we do want to do, and be part of the wide national movement that is stopping those things happening. So I suppose it's to say to people that all of these things are connected. you know, we're looking at different positions, and I suppose the other two big questions that we haven't spoken about are immigration, and we've seen that on both sides of the border. That move to pin the blame for problems on the poorest people in our society. We see working class people, ordinary, otherwise decent people. And I say otherwise decent people because there's something wrong with your decency if you think that somebody should be left homeless because they're not the same colour as you, or because they're not from here. But on both sides of the border, those cards are being played. The immigration card, what about our own homeless people? And yet, quite often, you will see the people who care about Ukraine, the people who care about Palestine from the heart but don't politically see it, will also tell you that we can't have, we have too many foreigners coming in and we're not safe. The safety thing again. We're not safe. There's too many single men coming in and their culture, the bit that really gets me is that their culture is to disrespect women. And I keep saying, sorry, who were you talking about there? Who were you talking about? You know, who imported that? So I think it's understanding how we pull all of that together, because it's all the same thread. There's the same game is being played whenever we look at Palestine, who's pulling the strings, homelessness, what's causing it. And if we create more war, the logic consequence of creating more war is we create more refugees. If we create more refugees, we will also create more economic immigrants. If we keep this imbalance going, then the movement will continue to be from the global south, which Europe colonized. I was reared well. My father, when I was very young, said, "Where is the flag of England? Where is she to be found? Wherever there's blood and plunder, they're under the British crown." He also told me that Europe robbed, raped and plundered the Southern Hemisphere. And people forget that. But how do we start looking at all these disparate things which are pulling ordinary, decent people to the right, when in order to solve all their problems, we need to be pulling them to the left, to put that simply.
To put it simply,
Well, the last bit
she's so cute, isn't she? Leaving the hardest questions till the end, and we're not even at it. Look, there's so much in that, but I mean, I think that was really strong, the point actually about the United Ireland, because that actually ties us in a lot, because there's an irony in that one of the reasons for the impetus now behind the whole idea of a United Ireland, and Leo Varadkar's all in favour when it's going to happen and all that kind of thing, is because of Brexit. And a lot of people, and you can win people over that this is the North's route back in to the European Union, and that's why it's very much tied in with what is going on in the European Union, because a United Ireland in a European Union which is spiralling down the road of militarisation. And when we say, like, you're basically going to be in NATO, maybe not in name, but the European Union themselves are quite open and say, can I align with myself? I am NATO, we are NATO, of course we align with ourselves. So they're already in the place where every single military venture that the European Union does is aligned with NATO. So you'd be talking about a United Ireland in NATO, a United Ireland which will be marketed as a sort of, like when the United Germany, as a cheap labour, come in, rob the place blind, the usual. So that's obviously what people don't want. And I think it's out of the mask dropping around the European Union's complicity in the genocide in Gaza that is actually one of the levers we have of educating people that this is not where you want to be. Because a lot of people in successive polls, loads of people and people in the north voted to stay. People in the south love the European Union, it's great. Actually, Ursula von der Leyen and Gaza has changed that. It's not that anything in the European Union has changed, it hasn't. It's just the mask has slipped and the old colonial days of Europe have been revealed. And what's happening in Gaza is not an accident. They're not bonfiring international law because they don't understand what's going on. They do understand what's going on. This is a test case. It's a warning. And I think we see the warning coming to pass by what's going on in Lebanon. I mean, I find it utterly bizarre. I mean, loads of people know Lebanon because anybody in defence forces, everybody goes to Lebanon, get a few extra bob, bring back the old high-tech gear with the extra wages. Everybody loves Lebanon, all that kind of thing. It's of a similar size to the island of Ireland. And what we've seen in the last couple of weeks would have been literally like, say, moving in 20 years ago, the Brits deciding they were going to take out Gerry Adams and they bomb Belfast. And they kill 1,000 people and 1 million people on the island of Ireland have to move. Can you imagine? That's the scale of the catastrophe that the people in Lebanon are facing. And the Irish media talk about Israel is targeting Iranian-backed Hezbollah militants. They're bombing civilian areas. And now with UNIFIL in the middle of that, sitting there going, bombing them. Like, this audacity has been enabled by ignoring what they've done over the past year. We've enabled it by saying nothing, by doing nothing. And the European Union was fully involved. 1,000% increase in arms from Germany. It's not only Germany. We allowed our airspace to be used, and still are, by American weapons going to Israel to go and kill Palestinians. Fact. Our companies are selling more dual-use goods to Israel than they were previously. The European Union gave money to Israeli universities as the Israelis bombed Gazan ones. It's absolutely beyond belief what they're doing now. And in previous times, in 2002, the European Union suspended the EU-Israel agreement because of Israeli atrocities. Now they're in an openly declared genocide and they call for a review. It should have been suspended straight away over a year ago. It's really bizarre where the world is going. I mean, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, arch Zionists, the pair of them. Margaret Thatcher imposed a 12-year arms embargo on Israel for the previous Lebanon war. And Micheál Martin and the European Union are still sending weapons there. How far has the world come that international law and the norms that were drawn up after World War II, which were never really applied to the Western countries anyway, but they did serve to keep certain things in check. That's been binned now. And we're talking about a world where might is right, a much more dangerous world. And the victims of that will absolutely be in the countries where wars are being engaged. But we haven't even touched on the cost of climate change. And militarism is a huge factor in climate change. And it's not factored in anywhere. And they give out about people going on their holidays on a Ryanair flight and all of that because we all have to watch the aviation, and we do. But transport, shipping and aviation emissions combined are less than the military footprint, and nobody calculates the military footprint. So it doesn't make any sense in that regard. So I've strayed away from your question, but they are all linked. And I do think the pain and the horror of Gaza has removed the blinkers from people everywhere. They've done it in the States. It's like it's their Vietnam. It's the modern generation's Vietnam, and things were never the same after that. It's opened up a consciousness of people that we can't sit by in that. This is barbarism. These are the darkest days of humanity. And we're either all screwed, humanity is gone, international law is gone, it almost is anyway. But if we allow this to continue, it absolutely is. And I think people are really grappling with that. I found the meetings around the anniversary of the genocide difficult because you have people coming to them who feel are really hardened resolve to carry on that fight and to keep it going, but also a sort of a feeling of helpless, like, God almighty, like, what actually has to happen for this to stop? International law is gone. Most of the countries in the world are on this page. Why isn't it stopping? And we know it's not stopping because of the role of the US and the EU. So we have to challenge that in the areas. You have to take where you stand, and we have to fight that where we are, which does mean in Europe and does mean in Ireland, and reaching out on that. So, I mean, it's quite incredible. I mean, we didn't touch on different things, but you look at the whole UNIFIL thing and say, oh, there was a chemical attack almost on a UNIFIL base, and the media didn't even cover it at all, nothing. But what people are saying is that, well, you know, why aren't they shooting back? Why they're being attacked? Should they be shooting back? But we're nearly at a stage now where the so-called defence forces of the world are incapable of defending people. And the idea of ordinary people organising in solidarity in face of that barbarity is kind of nearly posed. But I suppose the hope that we take out of it is that people are waking up to what's gone on, that the majority of people in the world can see it. We just haven't found the ways of wrestling that control yet. But it is all linked. And I suppose it's always darkest before the dawn. These things are happening because of the decline of US empire. European colonial countries are really screwed in terms of the way they're handling things. It's a bit messy now, but out of that, I suppose, we will find a way of going forward. But I do think the discussions and the debates that will come around the United Ireland and will be posed will make this very, very real for people here and bring it right home, you know.
Well, thank you. When we didn't know what we were going to talk about, we got a lot in there. So I'm going to, and as much as I can see, and I'm going to try looking up and down, open this and I up for a bit of Q&A. What kind of time have we got?
I don't know. What time have we got, or how we? We're okay. So whatever. What time? It's 5 to 9. So.
Good. So it's 5 to 9. So let's say we have about half an hour. And I'll see questions coming up. I see one here, and I'm going to ask again. I see some over here. Yeah. So at the minute we've got about some. That helps. Thank you very much.
You all look lovely.
I see about 10 questions coming across, and so I'd ask people. Now I'm not going to be as much as if I hear you make a sentence that doesn't have a question mark at the end of it, it'll be stopped. But just try and remember that the answers might belong, so try and keep the questions focused. And please, if you have a question and somebody has already asked it, don't just ask it slightly differently for the change of hearing yourself ask it, if you don't mind. I'm going to start... I'm going to start over here with this young woman. No, I'm going to start over here with it. Because men have had a good opportunity to speak, I'm starting with this young woman, and you'll be next.
I'm just wondering, we've had it was about a month ago, the March States, we've shared in Spain about China, what can they have? Like English will cost me out. What more can we do? It seems that nothing's working anymore. It seems like all shouting and screaming and marching. To me, it feels like one cheating now. You know, these flash meetings and gatherings are happening.
So, what can we do? Do you want to hold that one, or do you want to answer it now?
Well, you're the boss.
Right.
I do what I'm told sometimes. Yeah, I mean, look, it is a question that people are asking themselves everywhere. We've been over the last one, I've been at the commemoration ones in Brussels, in Italy, and it's the same everywhere. And I suppose the first thing to say is the fact that so many people are having that conversation. On the one hand, it's, well, you know, what do you expect given everything that's happened? But on the other, it shows so many people are engaged. And it shows that protesting alone is not enough. We have to have more direct action. We have to go into the area of BDS in a much more serious way. And it may seem long, and it is, but in the struggle to get rid of apartheid took time. But it did, sometimes it can seem like nothing's happening and then everything changes in a flash. So the chipping away does have an impact. I've met so many people who have come to the issue of Palestine for the first time in the last year. They've never really heard about it or followed much stuff about it at all. And now they're full-time engaged in this. That's not going to go away. So we have to look at harnessing that. So I do think some of the direct action stuff, there's an awful lot of groups in different areas, like there's health sector workers who are sort of trying to get stuff banned, that anything that's bought from Israel, in the health service, all of the different areas like that. And I think there will be flashpoints. The crowd in Galway are brilliant. There's a hotel owned by an Israeli there, and every single initiative that's organised in the hotel, they contact the group, they have that organisation bombarded to cancel. And it does happen. And the fact that the government are looking at the Occupied Territories Bill, although we know what they're at, means they know they have to deliver on this. So we need to do that, and we need to do that across Europe. And there are a lot of organisations now. I mean, to be honest with you, the union should be doing it. I mean, if the trade unions refuse to handle anything going in and out of Israel, that would be the end of it. And it comes back to Bernadette's point about how the Dun strikers were instrumental in that bottom-up BDS issue, which all the establishment in Ireland now claim, but they weren't involved at all at the time. And that took years. So I think it needs each of the local groups educating, BDS, bombarding in any area where you are. If you're in a school or college, wherever you are, you try and get that isolation of Israel fully. And I think the whole military bit is key in that as well. So it's not easy.
Yeah.
Not easy.
And I'm going to come in myself just on a couple of things on that. If everybody asks their granny, what did they do? You know, when we were fighting on every street corner here to keep people safe, to look after people, you don't have to have people's permission to do anything. You don't have to wait till somebody says that's allowed and this isn't allowed. You're allowed to do whatever you think is right. And then if other people think it isn't right for them, they don't have to do it. And there's a wee bit of people, I don't know how people fell into that, but there's a wee bit of people needing permission because they think, oh, that's sure it's only me. You know, when Mary Manning just said to the first customer, sorry, I can't put them through my till, I'm not handling Israeli grapefruit and oranges. Nobody gave her permission. She just did it. And then a few more of the women come round to help her to do it. And the union was very annoyed because it was a union instruction, which the union hoped nobody would pay a blind bit of attention to. So there are all kinds of things that you can do. A marching is important. Picketing is, and let the people do whatever they can do. The people who have raised money for children in Palestine, because it'll grow and you'll grow with it. The main thing you have to do is don't lose hope. Every time you despair, think of something to do. That will help, no matter how small it is. And people say it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. My motto is don't ask for permission and don't ask for forgiveness either. So I'm going to this gentleman's question over here.
Hello, it's Ron. No, some of the answer is that's a little bit sort of spanner me and a community activist as well. But in Ireland today, I feel there's no great interaction, and I think we need a broad front. A proper socialist and broad front that are among socialists and all we have in Ireland. And you're not seeing enough of them in my
Nice.
You think any will come along here to obviously there's stuff coming along with the EU army being behind? Do you think that people will raise up against it, or I don't think that there is any what?
I think there is change. I mean, the very fact of what you've achieved here with this festival, with the organisation of meetings like this outside of a party political structure, just shows that there is a kind of a yearning for different independent ideas around, as you say, socialism, republicanism, change, whatever you want to call it. I think in parts of the South, there is people trying to do that around left bloc, uniting people around the things we have in common more than the things that we divide us. So there is a yearning for that. But I suppose, you know, the first thing in fixing something is realising it's broken. And I think a lot of people are realising our society now is very, very broken, but the way forward on it is not that clear cut. So I think what we have to do is just expand cooperation like this. It's been done here, obviously in this sector of the community, but we need to do it across the island. And we need to do it across Europe. And I mean, we've been at loads of meetings across different parts of Europe on these very similar issues where people raise exactly the same kind of things, you know, but we just have to find the means to organise collectively. But it's definitely coming, and sadly it's coming out of the dire circumstances that people are living in, be it in Gaza or what they're watching here as well. So people have to find a way.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to take, then if you've got that, I'm going to take this guy up here, and then if we'll take a woman next.
So just a quick question. After your senior role, after twice, the next steps and how to address that kind of last question you talked about in terms of bringing a broad spectrum of the end.
God, that's a hard one. Yeah, look, I don't know. There is actually a lot of pressure on us to contest in the general election, which could be called next week. The jury is still out on that. Part of me feels a huge responsibility around that, particularly around the issues of neutrality and militarisation, which, to be honest, nobody raises in the same way that we do. So I do feel bad about it. I don't think it will be easy to win, but I don't mind losing, so that's not really an issue. But we've also developed quite a strong international platform. And so we would regularly get invited to meetings all over. We're in Norway. But I hate saying that because it makes it sound, I'm like, great, going to all these places. I don't mean it like that, but I mean the reach is quite extensive. We were absolutely gobsmacked when the likes of like Annie Lennox follows me on Instagram and she reaches out to me to put up a post about the election. I go, hi, I'm Scarlett here, this is mad. But when you see that level of support, it just shows you how even a voice in a wilderness, it's not a wilderness, but with a platform, can really actually make a difference. And we did organise events in Brussels where we brought people together from the peace movement in different countries, gave them a leg up and kind of did. And I'm supremely confident that ordinary people everywhere think exactly the same and are grappling with exactly the same issues. And it doesn't matter what continent really they come from. All anybody wants to do is have a decent life, have their kids better off than them, live in peace, go on the odd holiday, have enough food, a nice place to live. It's not that much to ask on a planet that has unrivaled resources, but we're blowing them. And I think getting that message across. So for me, I don't know. In the next 2 weeks, I'm under pressure to stand in the general election, whether I do or not, or whether I get elected, I don't know. But either way.
Let me say,
We need to.
If people are asking what to do, if you do go, you know what to do. I'll be there, and if anybody wants to come with me, we'll organise the bus. I'll do that. So, next, where are you going? Did we have a woman with a hand up somewhere? Yeah, over here. And then I'll take a man next. Yeah, it's terrible that you have to remind.
Can I ask, do you think there's a willingness in behalf of some of the local representatives in the Republic to allow the Irish Defence Forces to be murdered in Lebanon in order to justify Ireland moving away from neutrality? And if that did happen, they were murdered in this way unchallenged, would the Irish military in particular sort of some rights and elements and representatives? Do you think they would fall on the side of defending the neutrality in that position as a police force? Or will they, given that they're enriched with training, we decide that they will be armed to take on?
Really good question. I mean, I think I don't believe that anybody, even the most awful political representatives that we have, are that callous that they would do that. Maybe I'm naive in that. I don't believe that, but I am deeply concerned that there will be at least one or more Irish casualties. I think that is almost inevitable the way things are going. And if that were to happen, I know from contact with, I come from an army family myself, and people who've been out and would have good connections with them. that the soldiers and the veterans will be, as I said, marching to the US Embassy straight away, and not to mind the, targeting our own ministers if that was to happen. I think if that was to happen, it will smack over the head. It would be unsustainable for the government. It would cause a huge crisis amongst all of the people. And there's a kind of an irony in that, because a life is a life, and you know what I mean? But it would be a big crossover moment, and I really think it's a torn thing. The soldiers in the army really like our neutrality. They really like the ability of going there. Who wants to go and get killed for empire? Nobody does. But there has been, Bernadette talked, in the latter years, it started with the guy, Mark Mellett. He was head of the Navy, who became head of the Defence Forces, and he was very much courted by this European defence industry and this European integration. So now there's a group of them at the helm who are integrated in the EU military HQ. They, get to know them when you're together with the lads. You're all in the one office. We're breaking down barriers, and that's where they're at now. And big hardware, and they want the latest toys. It's not about improving the lives of soldiers or anything. So yeah, but I think that's one to watch. Sadly, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I've lost my man with the mics.
Well, you have to do either two women or one man.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. Who else has a question? Or are we done? Are we naturally done? Put your hand up and wave it loudly. There it is. If you think that I'm missing you, go like this. Practice.
Terrifying everyone now.
Yeah.
They're all afraid.
Go ahead.
One of the important points earlier was what do you do? And living here, we have to combat the media and misinformation. And, what do we do? That has reached levels that we didn't know here. And, yes, she said that the other thing we do is safe. But, how do you get the young people to understand what they need to do about social media, about the broad media and the mainstream media, which isn't showing anything, and why we're not really touching the people that we need to get with us? How do you get them all with us? By combating what the media have a hold on and the rest of it.
Well, yeah, some of the things we can do, talking about here, we're very focused on the Israelis, but not on who's enabling them. So, direct action there's not actually a lot of it happening. People are protesting, and protest marches are being, and that's important because that's where people can get started, to my mind. But there are things you can do. Some of the bad things that used to be done in the old days was. Well, the BBC should be picketed every day. There should be a white line picket at the BBC so that everybody going to their work every day have to go past it. That's what I mean by direct action. Some of the things that used to happen we did in the old days was great. Stephen Nolan runs a programme. I don't like Stephen Nolan. And there used to be programmes before. I don't know him personally. I don't like his programme. But there used to be programmes before, and you'd ring up and there's always a researcher. And the researcher, of course, wants to know what you're going to talk about. If they know what you're going to talk about, you don't get on. So we used to say, I'd like to talk about whatever was being talked about. I'd like to comment on what's been said about the price of butter. And you have a story to tell. So you get on. And the interviewer would say that, and we're going over now to Mrs. McMahon. And Mrs. McMahon, you wanted to talk about the price of butter. And Mrs. McMahon would say, no, actually, I wanted to talk about internment. And, of course, you wouldn't, the phone would go down. But you got saying the word. You got saying the word before you. Now, the benefit of that is imagine if everybody's ringing the Nolan show saying, I want to talk about, or us country people making fun of Belfast people used to say, I'm foaming up. I'm foaming up about the traffic. But when you get on, you say, good morning, Mr. Nolan. Actually, I want to talk about Palestine. Imagine when Seamus, when Stephen Nolan or Mark or whoever's on the radio can no longer rely on no one when the system doesn't work. When the researcher no longer knows if you're telling the truth or telling a lie, when you ring her up, and they're living in mortal dread that some poor person who's ringing out of the Shankill yet again to complain about foreigners turns out to be somebody from Mothers Against Genocide. And then they start giving bad manners to the person who's not. They start saying to the genuine article who's ringing up to complain that there's too many refugees and that the people living on welfare would need to be made go to work. And they eat them. They say, are you sure you're not ringing up to talk about Palestine? You know, those things work. So you go into the bank, but you have to do a wee bit of research. We used to do it in the Northern Bank. You go into the bank or in somewhere, you go into Tesco. I tend to do Tesco's all the time. If it's not clearly marked, I say to somebody walking past, you wouldn't check what country that came from. And I know that, oh God, but not again. But if all those things help, but and you can do them for yourself. You can do them in your own street. You could do them in your own wee community group. You don't have to ring some national or regional organisation and say, I'm foaming up to ask if I'm allowed, if I'm allowed to do this. And then you have to set yourself some guidelines, do things safely for yourself. You don't have to be hateful to anybody, but you can do things that work. And when you liberate yourself and your mates to do whatever you think is right, it is absolutely remarkable how creative you can be when you think somebody ought to do something. When you're listening and you say, I wonder if somebody wouldn't do something. Your next thought should be, what if that somebody was me? What would I do? And then go and get 2 or 3 other people and go and do it. That's how it's done. So answer that question because...
Well, you did answer it, but I think it is a huge factor. The media is a huge problem in everything we face in society, and there has been a realisation, I think, amongst many people, they just switch off. People don't listen to RTE, they don't buy newspapers because they don't believe what they see in it. And there is a gap there. And that gap is in part filled by social media, but obviously with all of the hysteria and the nonsense that goes with that as well. So I do think the idea of picketing, there have been pickets on RTE and all of that, ringing up and correcting things. This, Iranian-backed Hezbollah, when they're in you never say, US and EU backed Israel. This kind of thing, sort of justifying it and all of that. So, and correcting that and writing in and sending a complaint email every time you see a programme. It's annoying, but it can be done. But I think the main thing is that we make our own media, and it's really direct contact and discussion, and it's leaflets around the specific issues and that, because media is changed now. The idea, historically, there used to be an exchange of views. You could have a dialogue about it. Now you're not allowed to have a different view. There is only one view coming from the mainstream, and if you question that around COVID, you're an anti-vaxxer. If you do it on the war in Ukraine, you're a Putin puppet. In Israel, you're anti-Semite or whatever. They want to shut down dissent anywhere. So the only way, we don't own the media. We can annoy them. A lot of people switch on, but we make our own instead. And that might be a leaflet. It might be, in some ways, it's easier with emails and dialogue. And the amount of people who who've turned to cultural initiatives and that, educating around Palestine strike, and like even older people who've never been involved in the issue, who are now writing poetry, who are reading history books, who are learning. That's not going to go away. That's a kind of capital that we build from. And then, as Bernadette says, you have that conversation with one or two people, with your workmates or whatever, you bring them along to an event, suddenly the penny drops. I honestly think that most people are just kind of almost silenced into sort of the horror of what they're seeing. Is too much to nearly bear, that people switch off because they just cannot experience the level of it. Like, but obviously that's a luxury we can't afford to have, but it's very understandable that people do that.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to take a quick look if there's any urgent questions or, there's somebody here and there's somebody here. Now I've got two women in a row. If there's a man hasn't asked a question, go like this, because my eyesight is nearly as bad as my hearing. Yeah, is there a gentleman over here? Yeah, and then that's it. Has somebody got their hand up over there? No? No?
Man here.
Gentleman here, great. You're going to be lucky you've now got the last question. These two women and this man, and that's it.
My question is a terrible. Sometimes you think so low because of people that turn up doing it. But when we're sort of talking about American investors and we have to look up what they look at to, and it can be quite confusing for people. I have relatives in America and I'm often cold paint and they educated me in terms of like, I was ignorant about all that. And I'm very grateful now for my mind being open to that. But I suppose it's in terms of that narrative, don't rock the boat because we need America. That's a great level for some people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can take the second lady's question, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Didn't say, that's not the question for me. Right now, was no very good. And I would like to thank you for what my heart brought to you, because I thought what you have done over the years, I think, tremendous, right?
Yeah. You're not going to ask a question. No.
To the embassy, I can't tell you that 15 years ago. I was doing my Cameron's outside on the embassy. You have tirelessly worked. And the people in this room do not know the work you did.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, you're the only person I plant that's allowed. That's allowed. And I take the gentleman with the last question, and then you get
just with the Ukrainian issue, with the Israeli Middle East crisis, the rise of BRICS, are the lines being drawn for a global conflict? Will the main cons get their day in the sun with another global conflict to finally decide? Or will it be when we finally realise that the sun's going down on the American Central, the American Empire? Well, I'm going to see the end of it with a global conflict.
No, that was a big heavy question.
Yeah,
heavy question at the end, and this. I thought I'd put those two questions together.
Well, maybe I'll do that one first because that will be a horrible, scary end to the meeting, but not exactly an absolutely bizarrely unrealistic one either. Because actually the parameters of that are there. Whether we would come to that situation or not is a different matter, but the reason we are where we are is because of the decline of US empire, and it's out of that sort of desperation and chaos that we have this madness taken over. And the alternative to that and the new forms of sort of multipolar world are not yet in place. So we see the United Nations completely dysfunctional, ineffective, but we have to make it work some way. It's the only thing we have. I'd like to think that there are enough sort of sensible people in the US and in Europe who will rein that in. But when I see what Europe did to itself in its response to the war in Ukraine, It's utter lunacy. I mean, I'm on a Ukrainian hit list as a Russian propagandist for two reasons. One is I said that the war was a NATO proxy war, which it is. And the second was for saying that the sanctions hurt Europe, the people of Europe, more than it hurt Russia. That's an actual fact. Like, the German economy is in absolute tatters. And all the time I was saying, Jesus, German capitalism must kind of say, hang on, lads, now, why are we doing this? But they allowed Nord Stream 2 and their cheap gas to be blown up apart from the environmental damage. They were prepared to shoot themselves in the tree feet for that anything is possible. I mean, with Leo Varadkar saying we need to de-risk from China. The South of Ireland gets more money, 6 times as much from China as they get from us. What are we de-risking from? Like, it's utter craziness. So I'd like to think there's voices holding it back, but at the home in Europe at the moment, they're not there. So we're going to have to find different ways on that. But look, that would be a big step. It's a process, I suppose. The danger is there, but hopefully it wouldn't come to that. Because the US itself, because people in the US are different than the US administration. And you know, when they say, oh, you're anti-American, you say, I'm actually not anti-American, I'm incredibly pro-American, but I'm pro-American people in that, you know, these are the people. Do you think the American people want their money spent on militarization, on weapons, or do they want their big companies getting off their taxes in a tax haven in Ireland? No, if you actually like the Americans, let their companies pay their taxes at home and not rest here. So a lot of people in America have seen through things now. Now, they're completely disconnected in that they have an electoral process now, which, as you say, both sides are bought for by the Israeli lobby, even though the majority of people on the street and the whole democratic process is not very democratic at all. But people are realising that, who never realised it before. And that has to be our starting point. And it comes back to Julian then, because he did say, like, if wars can be started by lies, peace can be started by the truth. And that ties in exactly that. Telling the truth and giving information everywhere you can is in some ways the most powerful thing that you can do, because that then does open people's eyes. And you can do that just by opening your mouth to the person sitting beside you in work or whatever, bringing a book on a bus. It will change, because the circumstances that we live in are forcing people to realise that the luxury of sitting back and doing nothing is not something that any of us can afford. Be it the battle against climate change, the complete and utter chaos that's going on with the rampant militarisation, or the slaughter of innocent people in the name of Zionism, which is, as Bernadette said, a former European colonial project. We're all back to colonialism. That's where it actually comes back to. And in that sense, we, as Irish people, have so much to offer in that. But unfortunately, there's not enough people in positions of power doing it at the moment. But that's fine, because the people who change things are the people organised in the communities who put it up to them. So everybody has that task to go from here and do that.
Yeah, so just so that you don't go home, folks, in despair. I said last night, and I was surprised that people hadn't heard that phrase. It's a very strong Tyrone phrase, that the only time we were beat was when we didn't show up for the fight. So what is important is to show up every day and to have hope. Because I personally hope, and the reason I hope is that because people, you know, we're looking at the planet, we're looking at the whole place, and it's all together between climate change and war, and you could get really depressed. And the violation of human rights, and then you forget the bit that's most important, is that, see, us humans, we're mammals, we're animals, we're not something distinct from nature, we're part of it. We like to think ourselves as entirely different, rational creatures, not do it great on the rational front at the minute. But like all creatures, big and small, we have two fundamental instincts: the survival of the self and the survival of the species. And our leaders are heading us towards destruction. Destruction of peace, destruction of the species, and destruction of the planet. And I have no doubt that in all the small bits we're doing, there will be a turning point when our fundamental human instinct, not our intellect, not our rational thinking, our fundamental collective instinct, if we keep working, because spontaneity requires organisation to be effective, but it will turn. And no matter how small the piece we keep doing, no matter how small you think this piece you're doing, other people, small people like us, are also doing the small bits. And it's the same like the drops of water that make puddles, sooner or later make a flood. So the fundamental thing that everybody has to keep doing is keep on, keeping on going, doing the very best you can. And when you can do better and more, do more. A couple of things. Do nobody a disservice. Don't win your point by destroying somebody else's rights. If it's something you don't want to do, don't do it. Don't stop somebody else from doing it if they think it's right. And the biggest thing that we have is our power as people. And we have a right to ask trade unions why there's no strike, why anybody's handling this. We have a right to ask the people we elect what they're messing about. But the biggest right we have is to link arms ourselves and do it for ourselves. And in doing it for all of those things, we know what to do. And the people who know best what to do are the people who are suffering from what's wrong. So you want to do something about homelessness, ask the homelessness people. If you want to do something for Palestine, let the Palestinians here lead. If you want to do something for women, let the women lead. But when you're going to bed at night, ask yourself, what did I do today to make myself hope? What did I do today to make my life better and everybody else's life better? And if it was only light a candle like my mother used to do, it's still better than cursing the darkness. So thank you all.